welcome to yet another episode of the Let's Talk Leadership podcast. This is a show where I, Elly, MD of Transition Partners, and the CEO, Sandra, talk to some of the world's highest achieving business and tech leaders.
In each episode, we will be sharing tales, tips, techniques, and war stories in the hope that you will learn from some of these amazing leaders to help you develop and progress your career.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Let's Talk Leadership podcast. So this week, we've got the fabulous Toby Smith-Firth, who is the new European IT Director at Masonite. Toby is a superb IT Director who has recently been awarded 18th place at the Cio 100 Awards this year. He's a seasoned IT leader and strategist with 30 years experience who has worked for some superb brands, including Betty and Taylor's of Harrogate, Sainsbury's, Oracle, and more. Toby actually came really highly recommended to me to be on our podcast by one of his lovely team members when he was at Betty's for his empathetic leadership. This particular team member was going through a really tough time at work, and he was saying what a superb role model and leader Toby was to him. So we're really excited to have him on the podcast today. He is also a board member for Fight Night, helping raise money for the fabulous Action for Children. So we can't wait to find out more about your story and your journey into leadership today. Hello, Toby.
Hello, thanks for having me on the podcast. Very excited.
Oh, we're very excited to have you on. And actually, it's so nice because you came recommended as a superb leader, which is, it's quite a compliment, isn't it?
It certainly is. I'm very lucky.
Well, we can't wait to discuss that.
Obviously doing something right, so that's fantastic. And that's what this podcast is all about, is to share those learnings and your experiences as a leader in order to help others and give back to the community, because it's one of those things, isn't it? I don't think there's that many that are natural born leaders, and we're always continuously learning and learning through life, learning through life lessons and mistakes and things, and how we overcome those. So I know Elly and I, we find these really helpful for us and in our roles as well. So I'm looking forward to this one, and empathetic leadership's a big one for me as well. So firstly, I usually like to kick off these podcasts with setting the scene, giving the listeners and viewers a little bit of context. So if you could, Toby, just start by giving us all a bit of a background in terms of your journey, how it all started, how you got into leadership, and kind of your journey to get to where you are today.
Sure, happy to do that. And I was reflecting on this, ahead of coming onto the podcast. I'm thinking, when did it all start, really? I guess, my technology journey started probably when I was about 10 or 11. My dad worked for BT all his life, and they had a thing a bit like a library, but you could book out a computer for the weekend. So this is what, way back when, because obviously I'm quite ancient. And so he'd bring a computer home for the week, and then I'd have a chance to plug in the cassette player and load a game or do some coding. So I think that sort of lit the spark for me. And then I was lucky enough to get a job in my holidays when I was about 16 in an IT support function of a big publishing company, and there I was, as a young lad, out there installing computers, helping fix things, understanding how frustrating it is for people when it doesn't work, and I think I carried on doing that through A-levels university before I got my first proper job. But I think that's always stayed with me, about how important it is and what a difference you can make if you're in technology, whether that's, on the front line as we have teams obviously doing that day in, day out, or leadership roles. And then, I think from that starting point, really, I think my career has been in sort of 3/3, because when I left university and started work, I was very much in technology, deeply technical roles. You mentioned sort of working with Oracle and Unix and, all that sort of stuff. In the run up to year 2000, which way back then was going to be a big thing, with planes falling out the sky, and it wasn't that dramatic, but there was a lot of upgrade work in the run up to that, and I was lucky enough to be working with BP Oil, so a massive global business, and not only doing the deeply technical stuff, but also a chance to travel. So I was lucky enough to go to Singapore, to New Zealand, across Europe, doing lots of stuff, which as a chap in his 20s was fabulous life experience, as well as doing the technology. So I guess then moving into the sort of the middle part of the career, then I was on the other side of the table to where I find myself now. I was in the supplier consulting side, So I was running a small consultancy with some fellow partners. I then worked for a global consulting practice and had the joy of experiencing that sort of blended delivery model of global consulting organizations with on-site and a big offshore business, but ultimately being responsible for delivering big programs of work. And at the time, there were some of the biggest ones going on in Europe. So it was really exciting. And I think really led to that sort of final stage of that working with Sainsbury's that you talked about. I spent a chunk of time there working on one of their transformation programs, and real scale. Their IT function, when I left there and moved to Betty's, was bigger than the whole of the Betty's and Taylor's turnover. So there's some big stuff going on there. And I think that transformation word is then what took me into the chunk of my career I'm in now. It's really sort of gathering all of that information and experience together from that journey of technical consulting, program delivery, and then putting that into a leadership and transformation context about how you can turn technology to really achieve business outcomes is the normal phrase, but way more than that. Actually changing people's lives. And I'm really proud of sort of the last work I was doing at Betty's and Taylor's was actually had the tagline of putting a smile on people's faces.
So lovely.
How we were responding to clearly the COVID crisis, but also that hybrid way of working and how you collaborate differently when you're not together. And that's really takes us up to now with starting a new role at Masonite.
Yeah, fantastic. Brilliant. And what size teams have you been responsible for leading?
Sure. So the last team I had sort of around 40 within that business. But in previous organisations and programs, then you're talking matrix teams, which are 1-200 sort of size really.
Wow.
I think actually it was one of those things about leadership, and I was talking to somebody recently about this. About it's quite traditional to think of the teams that you own when it comes to line management and direct report lines and how all that filters down. But actually, I've experienced way more, maybe because of consulting, that actually it's far more hybrid and matrix. So you may not actually own the people, but you're still working with a large group of people, and you still have to find a way to motivate and to lead across that environment, which is different to the I'm your boss, I tell you type, leadership. It's way more bringing people through that journey, understanding their strengths and weaknesses, and gathering that team to make the difference, because you can't do it because you don't own them.
No, interesting. So how did you sorry, I'm going off a bit off piece here. How did you, when you first stepped into a leadership role, how did you feel about that? How did kind of having that responsibility, knowing that you were responsible directly for X number of people, how did it make you feel? Like, was it quite daunting, or were you fairly confident that you could be a good leader? Like, it'd be quite interesting because it'll then bring me nicely onto my next question.
Okay. I suppose I ought to be honest, right?
Yeah.
I have to work hard at being confident, if I'm honest. And I've just explained sort of those career moves, and I guess each of those sort of chunks represented quite a shift. So back when you were a techie, and I would say you're sort of based around your knowledge power. So, I'm an expert in whatever it was, Oracle, databases or whatever. And so I could go into a room with some very senior people, but I'd know the stuff, right? So my power came from what I knew. And it doesn't matter how senior you are, I enjoyed working with senior people, but they can be challenging, right? But I had that knowledge power. And I think when I moved into consulting and program management, I was like, do I know this stuff now? And because I've been on self-trained on a Prince course, does that make me an expert project manager? No, it's the learned experience, right? It's the failures you mentioned at the start. I hope you're not going to ask me about too many of those. And the successes, right? And then again, to answer your question, to move into a leadership position, I have to say, when I moved into Betty's and Taylor's, that's my first IT director role. And what experience could I claim of being an IT director? But what I had got was over 20 years experience of leading programs, of leading transformation, of technology, and really the opportunity was to bring all that together and to learn the trade, if you like, of a more senior leadership role. And I think I've definitely developed, over that time to the position now. But I think you said something earlier about we're always learning, and I'm really a proponent of that. And you also mentioned the Cio Awards, which is very fortunate to see the team's work recognised in that. But there's some fabulous interviews with other members of that Cio 100, and I was there making notes like mad, because there's a fantastic lesson.
There's some fantastic people in that. No, definitely. Brilliant. So as Elly mentioned earlier, you've been described by one of your team members as a real empathetic leader. Where do you think that would be interesting to understand, I guess, where that kind of stems from, and tell us more about your leadership style?
Sure. It's a great question. So where does it stem from? I think along my career, I've had feedback that I'm one of the things that maybe people are sometimes surprised about in the technology leader is around sort of emotional intelligence and being able to read the room. And I think there's all sorts from probably childhood and background about that in my past, just about really being able to listen and put together and hear what's going on in the room. So I think that's just a strength that I have. I think one of the things about a tech leader is how you can translate and simplify and be able to explain complex things to people. So you sort of end up, I think, as a tech leader, you end up in a place of translating and listening, and that's just around the day job, the functional life. But I think that also then extends into where people are, and whether it's where they are in their life, what's going on for them. Where are they in their career? What are their motivations? And being really curious about that, because you don't get the best from your team if you either don't have that aligned or aren't having honest conversations about that. And I think this last 12 months with COVID is no doubt you talk to lots of people in your podcast, and as you network with people, this has been a year of that really being amplified. Really having a window into the home as you have today, with all that goes with that, right? And I'm sure in your world the same as mine. Back in March, it was I'm on a Zoom or a Teams call, and there shouldn't be an interruption. And what happens if a pet or a child or whatever comes now? It's like, yeah, whatever.
Yeah.
Come and give me a hug, or oh sorry, the doorbell's about to go, as it may well do in this podcast, and we're way more relaxed. But also I think to get back to your point. I think even though I might claim I'm an empathetic leader, just in this last year, I've been way closer to what's really going on for people, and way more curious. And the circumstances that you talked about in your intro, Elly, about what's going on for somebody in my team, I feel you should know about that and be connected to that and be supportive of that in any way that you can.
Yeah. Well, we certainly agree with that. And I think, like you say, you've really gained a window over the past year into everyone's lives. And I think we really need to take this as an opportunity. This is how we need to face leadership and approach it moving forward. So I love everything you said there. So it's fantastic having you on and hearing your story. I'd love to know a little bit more. It's been a tough year. And obviously last year, with everything you were doing at Betty's and Taylor's, it must have been actually, there was some probably really exciting stuff going on, like you say, being able to put smiles on people's faces and help deliver the product. So that must have helped G everyone up and keep everyone focused on their goals. But I think it has been tough, and it's always really important for us if you can give us any tips around how you motivate your people and unite them through times of change. And particularly, you started your new job, Masonite. Talk us about, I guess, from the leadership perspective of like bringing everyone together and getting them focused towards goals, and how you go around doing that.
Sure. Okay. I think there's maybe two parts in that. One, reflecting on that seismic change of our ways of working, and I won't repeat the sort of stuff that every IT director or functional head in this space will have said about the momentous shift to home working, and all of that in those sort of frantic first few weeks. But I think that it has irrevocably, if I could say it, changed how we're going to work for the future, and starting this new role, and being curious about that. What is that? As we come out of the worst of it and have a different relationship with work. So, in terms of motivating people, one of the things we were doing a survey on some months ago was, what do people want for the future? What is flexible working? And, I think I used to claim, a year ago, I think the IT team at Betty's and Taylor's embrace some informal flexible working, but, really we're talking about a day a week from home, flexing start and end times, compressing some hours. And, we did stuff beyond that as well, but it, it really wasn't, where we moved it into, where suddenly everybody working from home. And that's a different world, right? And I think we're still wrestling with what that new normal looks like. But one of the things that certainly, has fed back from the team has been about trust. And, I think lots of leaders probably, held that question of trust. Are we okay with people working from home? Is that really going to work? And I think it was how did it work, but clearly that just got debunked within a very short time because it just had to work. But actually about trust. So motivation, a lot of my team are really motivated by that change in work-life balance. And seeing the kids for breakfast and still being there, at bedtime. I used to get home after an hour or more's drive from Harrogate, just about 7 o'clock in time for, my youngest to go to bed. And now I'm finishing work and part of the maelstrom of the family, to enjoy that for better or for worse. So the question there was about motivation, but I think a lot of that stems in that, how are you and having that balance. We've taught work-life balance for years, but this has been a real game changer. And then, that's more about the person in it and how they're operating and having a different relationship with work, which is motivating in itself, not the drag of the 5-day-a-week commute. But then in terms of, leading a team, I think there's really a bit around what's the vision, where are we going, where are we headed, and how you bring people into that vision. And it can be a challenge because, you've got people whose daily existence won't feel like where the business strategy is. They're firefighting, they're on the front line, whether that's, the front line of making doors or, as it was, making tea and coffee and cakes. Or it's the front line of IT services where things are breaking and you've got to go out and fix them, right? But we've worked really hard. I've worked with teams and with the new team developing that vision. So what is it we're here to do and to make a difference? And then I think that sort of leads me onto the values of a business as well. So it's way past the days when corporate social responsibility was a CSR tab on the end of your website. I think it matters way more to people about what are the values of the company and how does that stack up with what's going on for us in society. So whether it's plastics or whether it's conditions around the world for poorer parts of the world where you source materials from, what's your really ethical, moral values and standpoint as a business. And I know that is absolutely factoring into recruitment, as I'm sure you see every day, that people want to know more about the business and what do you stand for. And the sort of people in my team that I've had, that it's not a tick box. They care about that. So I think if you bring those things together, how is somebody in the work that they do? How are we operating in a new way, in a new hybrid way of working? With the vision of the business and how their job makes a difference. The NASA thing, right, of the janitor sweeping the floor and what do you do? I put a man on the moon. It's a well-worn cliche, but I think it's true.
Yeah.
People want to be able to make that connection, whether it's the beautiful products that you make or the difference that you make in people's lives.
That's fantastic. You mentioned then about the recruitment piece, and obviously when you're interviewing people nowadays, they are really, I guess, focused on all aspects of the business. But I think it'd be good. It's always a challenge. A lot of our listeners are scale-ups and startups, and they are going to be doing a lot of hiring. So, have you got any top tips around attracting and retaining talent?
Gosh, yeah. If I had all the answers right, I'd be rich man with. But I mean, one of the more mundane factors is sort of where you are. So when I was based in Harrogate, there was some reality of the pool you're fishing in.
It is tough around Harrogate, isn't it? Because you've got all the traffic to compete with. I mean, we haven't done much recruitment over that way. But yeah, I can imagine it.
So you've got the pool of leads, and you've got various things. But I guess it stems on from that bit around where people are at. I've certainly found getting to know your market that you're seeking to select from. Obviously, there's been a shift around much more flexible, dynamic, more remote working, and as we just discussed. But we're talking like normally, traditionally, then. I found we've really succeeded in attracting talent who are maybe in a different stage of their career. So I've hired some really fantastic people who've done all that travel like I did, who've done all that stuff of suitcases and long days and massive commutes. And actually, I want to be home by 5, 6 o'clock and on the golf course, or with the kids or the family, and just have a different quality of life. And that doesn't detract from the value they deliver. If anything, that they're bringing it in spades, and they could be in a bigger role. But they're taking sort of that balance. So that's something around attracting. I think there's always in tech sort of a pipeline. I started in service desk and moved up to senior roles, and I still see that as an engine room in IT, of getting people in, young, keen, eager, energy, passion for getting under the floors and doing all that stuff, and then developing them. And one of the things I really like about retaining, as you talked about, is that development of people. And I've had some great successes with people who started right at that front line and then have moved up to all sorts of different roles, whether that's web development or it's testing or it's program delivery, or then grown into other roles and left the organization I'm in, because I've not been able to always service every need of people's careers. But that's a great outcome still, isn't it, right? To see people develop and move on to their next upward steps.
That's fantastic. Yeah, I definitely agree. And I think, like, you talk about your first line support and progressing, but all of those skills that you have in first line support, the pressure, the people management, the customer service, all of those skills are so transferable. So you're 100% right to be able to look at those people like the engine room and then progress and develop your staff. Certainly helps you retain talent, and part of the reason, I guess, why you were recommended to come on the podcast today.
What I'd be interested in learning more about is, obviously you've got a great leadership style, one that I'd love to personally learn more about. However, I think, and you touched on this before, and you said, I hope you're not going to ask me too many of these. I'm sure there's been some challenges along the way where you've maybe got into some sticky situations, or not, things haven't quite gone according to plan. It'd be good to maybe one that's been like, one that I guess you'll probably remember for the rest of your life, like a life lesson.
One that still gives you shivers.
Yeah. Tell us more about that situation. Give us an example, and I guess what you learned from it and what you would have done differently in hindsight.
Sure. I think the one I go to, there was a really large go live of a really major program at St. actually, and I was leading that program, and got to D-Day, or in fact a number of days of this massive cutover, and we've done everything you possibly can, rehearse this thing, and all of that good stuff, right? Planned within an inch of his life. But stuff always goes wrong in a cutover. That's just the way of the world, and it went wrong quite badly at one point, where we'd been working at this for a long time, and we may have had to roll it back, and we could have done that, but this was a big deal, really big deal. And I remember being on the phone to the senior exec at the time, and we knew sort of literally how many hours we had to go before we'd have to press the button and go back, which would be a huge. It feels like a personal failure. It felt like massive impact to the team, to the business. There was a cost to that. It felt high stakes, really. And I think the thing that I really learned, one of the things I think I've learned about myself, is I've got a real be strong driver. In terms of transactional analysis, I'm the one who's still marching, with the rucksack after 30 hours being awake, and personally shouldering the load, if you like. That's sort of a bit about me. And but the realization is that you can't do it all, and I think that's a life lesson to me. It was a bit around leadership as I moved into more leadership roles, about the reliance on the team, and the trust actually you need to place in them. And this isn't made up, seriously, because I remember this is when it was in Holborn in London, and there we were in the middle of the night. I'd literally been up to 36 hours, and then you don't become effective. So I went to get a bit of rest, and the only place that was a bit quiet was actually the prayer room. And it's not about religion. I'm not making a plug for that, because it wasn't. It was it was the only dark, quiet space. And I went and had a nap, and I left it with the team. And I knew that by the time I'd had a short nap, we'd either be there or be going back. And as it was, one of the techies in the team found the issue, fixed it. And when I woke up, a couple of hours later, they said, "We think we've resolved it and we're moving forward."
Oh,
amazing.
And it was just, you know, I can feel the goosebumps now of that experience. It was, you know, I'd mobilised the team. I brought everybody in from home working. It was crisis time. You know, 17 people on a Sunday working on this issue, and somebody made the breakthrough. And I think that just, you know, first it was a massive relief. There's still a long way to go, and it was a big job to finish and to take through snagging and all that sort of stuff that happens in a post-live situation. But that for me was then that you have to trust your team, and succeed or fail, and they'll do that with your leadership. But you have to let them go. And I think it's a bit of the Frozen there. Let it go. You know, you've got to. You can tell I've got a young daughter, right?
My non-exec director sings that to me quite regularly, doesn't she?
I didn't know that.
I think that is a fantastic life lesson from a leadership point of view, and it sounds so simple, but it's so difficult to let go, to trust, and you know, for some of us who, I mean, I'm a control freak, and it, you know, it's taken me a long time. The last couple of years, I think I've got a lot better at delegating, but the whole trust piece it's something that I have to work really, really hard on.
Tell Toby what you did in January.
I'm having a break.
She's going to take 3 months off work. Because she's I
started working at 13. I went to university, but continued to worked my whole way throughout. I've been in recruitment for 19 years, and haven't really ever had a break, and I kind of just take everything on my shoulders. And it's been a tough year this year for everyone. So I've just basically decided to have a 3-month break and allow the team and the leaders in the business to 3 months space without me, and trust that the business will be all fine.
We'll be your tech support, don't worry. You can have a nap in the prayer room, and we'll help rescue the project. So yeah, no, it's really good. That was a really great story, actually. And I think even the fact about you saying that you went down for your nap, even that, there's just so much trust, because you could have easily just, I'm sure you were exhausted, 36 hours without sleeping, but you could have just kept going, couldn't you? But the fact that you enabled yourself to do that, and your team knew that you trusted them that much, so I'm sure that was part of the reason for their success. That's fantastic.
And then, you know, that takes you through then, because, you know, when you more senior you get, you can't be in that, but you have to ask good questions. You have to still be curious. You know, you still got a responsibility and accountability. But I've built a fantastic team in my last job, and then they, you know, build their teams, and that's, you know, how we sort of do it together, really. But that trust from, you know, top to bottom. And people make mistakes, but we learn from them. I have. You just asked about it, and we all do, right? And that's an important part of growing and learning. You need to make your mistakes, and you need to get your wins and learn from both.
Yeah, well, it's good to hear when there's some successes as well from sleeping on the job.
Yeah, definitely. Those were very well deserved after 36 hours.
So I'd love to, obviously there's been a lot of pressures. That's a perfect example there of the stresses of the role, and this year's been challenging for everyone, but I'd love to know about what keeps you sane and healthy, and how do you manage the stress of it all, Toby?
Yeah, because you seem really calm and chilled, and like, I'm curious to know how you manage it all.
Gosh, okay, great question. Well, it sort of links us all. What do you do, you know, for fun, and how do you de-stress? So we've actually got 5 kids between my
that's so great.
And ranges from 7 to 20. So we've had a really interesting year, because we've got 4 at university and then the little one. So life's never dull, and it's been massive journeys for the older ones, as they've either been in final years, as 2 of them are, or first years, as 2 of them are. You know, navigating starting university in COVID. You know, it's just very odd times, right? So I'm not sure that helps with the stresses. Actually, it's added to it, probably. You know, but equally trusting that they'll navigate and find their way, right? But I think the little one's kept us sane, because that's just.
How old's your little one? 7, or did you say 7? 7, yeah.
And, you know, obviously a long period at home, homeschooling. So all of those things that I think, you know, back to that empathy and what people have really gone through in the last 12 months. you will all know how hard it's been for you and people you know of doing all that and managing work and home. And I suppose the bit around that comment of you seem calm, I guess there's only so much you could do. And I think as a leader, that's what I've said to my teams in this period is you can't break yourself. Work will still be here. And as you're taking a 3-month absence, but there are periods of time where I've had to say to people, you're just going to need to forget about the work for a bit. And whether that's a day, a week, or working mornings, and just to forget about the afternoon, block it out, because you're juggling things. So I've tried to hold the mirror up to myself. I've not always been great at that, right? And tell people to do things, but
practice what you preach.
Yeah, and it's hard at times, isn't it? But you have people to remind you. And sometimes I think, so I think what's one of the things I like to do is get out and about, fresh air. I like doing gym classes. They were shut for a while, but where that's not there, doing them out in the garden. So financially, I'm glad nobody's got a video of it, but I do these classes called body combat classes. It's sort of a bit of martial arts and a bit of aerobics type stuff. And I started that with my little one. So we're there doing doing combat wombat, as we call it, in in the room in the garden. So I think you've got to keep sane, haven't you? And you've got to. I think more recently, it took me a while because I think right at the start, that as I said, almost like you're locked into your office space, aren't you? And it was I had a long commute and actually realised I missed it because that was a decompressed time. I'd have over an hour getting home, and by the time I got in, I'd had a grumble about whatever was going on. I put the worlds to rights. I'd listen to podcasts, or I'd done the other things to decompress. And I found that early period, it was a real almost like a clash of moving from whatever you've been doing in your work day to home life with a 7-year-old and or teenagers, or the different dynamic. So realizing even just knowing that and acknowledging that, you can then start thinking about, let's just take a breath before launching into things, and take a few minutes, and then more after getting out, as we went into winter, getting out and having a walk and getting some sunshine. But otherwise, you start the day in the dark, don't you? You finish in the dark, and you haven't done anything other than look at one of these screens. So no magic tips, but just what works for you, and making sure you're kind to yourself and to role model that with your team.
Exactly, and you sound like you do that a lot as well. If you want to briefly talk about your role then on the board at Bike Night as well, just go into that in a little bit of detail for anyone who doesn't know about Bike Night and the great impact it has actually on children.
Sure. So you said that the charity's Action for Children, and I've only recently been involved in that, but really their focus is about focusing on the cause of youth homelessness. So there's some fantastic charities you'll know of that work with homeless. And provide lots of support that's very desperately needed if you're in that situation. But what I like and think is brilliant about Action for Children is their focus on the causes. So what is it around relationship breakup, challenging home lives, or the situations that young adults find themselves in that is none of their fault, if you like, and how to support them, and also support the families to do that. So whether it's from a poverty angle and providing clothing and warmth and safety and security, or other examples of like the mother and baby unit at a prison, where they're supporting in outreach as mothers come back into the community, and how to help them bond with their child from that very early age. So they do fantastic work. We could do a whole podcast on that, right? And I got involved in that a couple of years ago. Bike Night, as you say, is the traditional event. That's like a sleep out of tech leaders, where you leverage your community and twist their arms to come and join in. But once they hear about the work, there's not usually a lot of arm twisting. And then some fun fundraising throughout the year. And as you have done yourselves, sleep out in whatever the conditions arise, and raise that much needed money. And of course, in this last 12 months, charity fundraising has been absolutely hit, because we've not been in the workplace. We've not been able to do those events in person. I know that from the Action for Children and the Bike Night perspective, they did a boycott your bed, which is something similar to you were talking about earlier, with sleeping out in unusual places, whether it's on the floor, in the bath, on the trampoline, or wherever. And I think that's sort of the future for the new norm. How do we sort of do exciting different fundraising events that fire up social media with some great acts and things that are happening digitally, as well as the main fundraising. But I'm really looking forward to, in this coming year of being able to do the big events as well as the other activities and raise that money for Action for Children. So, anybody who'd like to get involved in that in Yorkshire, let me know.
Definitely, and keep us posted. We got involved a couple of years ago, and we're happy to get involved again, although Elly might kick me afterwards or punch me for saying that.
I was the bravest out when it was raining all night and out there. Although I'm usually the girliest, I still cracked on.
We had a couple of people in tears.
Yeah, we had a few tears that night. But do you know what? It was brilliant, and actually something that I definitely recommend for this year. There's so many. I mean, tech is similar. Obviously, we're more on the recruitment side of it, but motivating your teams and trying to do fun stuff together is so important as a business. And this year we've tried to think of so many ideas. Everyone's sick of quizzes and everyone's, over certain things. But as a team, the past couple of weeks, we've done a few things with local charities, and actually we've had more fun doing that and brought us all together than all the different ideas that we tried to think of all year. So I think being able to support charities is an amazing thing to be able to do. And yeah, it's really helped bring our team together this past year as well, which has been fantastic. So last question to finish off the pod then. 2021, hopefully it's much better than 2020.
Yeah.
But I'd love to know what you're most excited about this year and big plans for the year, Toby.
Sure. So as we said at the start, I'm just brand new into a role at Masonite. Yeah. And so I think that's really, the fantastic, exciting plans for this year. They're, launching their strategy to 2025. And I'm going at a fantastic time to have joined that business and to be really looking at the exciting growth plans. So they've got some really ambitious growth plans. It's around taking the next step in terms of the product and the consumer and making that difference in the marketplace. So I've got lots to learn about doors and all things related to that. But I think what I'm most excited about and why I took the role is there's a great opportunity to shape the team. To really shape the way technology is going to make a difference, because that's what gets me out of bed each day. It goes way back to that starting point of making a difference. Whether it's as my dad keeps kidding me, all you tell me to do is turn it off and on, right? I said, but does it fix it? Yeah, so don't argue with science, right? But whether it's that sort of making a difference on the day-to-day of people's interaction with technology, or the bigger strategic pieces about how you're really making that difference to consumers in the market and how they interact with technology, how they shop, how they buy, how they talk to you, how they engage, around customer service and all other aspects. So I think that's the broad picture, new role and a 2021 to explore that. And then I'm really excited, more from the personal perspective with everything the kids are doing, and as they start their journeys as finishing uni or getting through their stages of life. So yeah, really lucky. There's lots going on both personally and professionally that means I've got lots to look forward to in 2021.
Fantastic.
So great. Well, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on the podcast. So thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to chat with us today. If anyone wants to reach out maybe about Bike Night or have a chat around your experience, Toby, is it best if people reach out on LinkedIn?
Yeah, that's great. Start a conversation. I'd love to have lots of conversations with people about that.
Awesome. Fantastic. I'm sure people are gonna want to chat with you and connect you after today. It's been fantastic hearing your story and such a fab leader.
Thank you very much.
We would like to thank all of our listeners for tuning in. It means a lot to us and we really appreciate your support.